The bank that had refused to renew the loan on her mother's house was a different bank in a different state from the one Nora Ellery would eventually buy for $6, but she thought about the first one the whole way to the second because that is how a certain kind of grief works. It lays one thing over another until you cannot tell which loss you are actually driving toward. She was 44 years old, and she had $1,100 in a car with 190,000 miles on it, and in the back seat she had 2 cardboard boxes that held everything the last decade of her life had come to, which was a set of accountant's ledger pads she had bought with her own money because the county would not, a loupe, a jeweler's magnifier she used for reading the pressure of a pen through a page, 3 fountain pens, a coffee mug, and a framed certificate that said she had been for 9 years a records archivist and forensic bookkeeper for the assessor's office of a county that had, in March, decided it could get by without one. She had spent those 9 years in a basement room that smelled of old paper and mouse and the particular dust that rises off a ledger nobody has opened since the men who wrote it died, and she had learned to do a thing there that almost no one alive could still do, which was to read an old set of books the way some people read weather. She could take 100-year-old ledger and tell you, from the color of the ink and the slant of the hand and the pressure of the nib and the tiny hesitations where a number had been changed, whether the man who kept it was telling the truth. She could find the single doctored entry in 1,000 honest ones the way you find the one out-of-tune string in a piano. Not by looking harder, but by knowing what true sounds like. It is a strange gift to have, because the entire use of it is to catch what somebody worked very hard to hide, and there is no one who thanks you for that, least of all the county that pays your salary, and so when the budget came due, she was the line they crossed out. She was very good at a thing the world had quietly decided it did not want done. 14 months from the afternoon, the assessor handed her a cardboard box and a form to sign. She would stand in the cold lobby of a bank that had been dead for 60 years and hold a single ledger up to the light of a work lamp. And an old man of 91 who had been called for half a century the finest man that county had ever produced would put both hands flat on the arms of his wheelchair and try to rise and then not rise, and the whole room would go so still that you could hear the wind work at the boarded windows. She did not know any of that yet. What she knew, driving west with everything she owned in 2 boxes, was that her mother had died in February and the house had gone to the bank in the spring the way water goes downhill, and that she had no job and no husband and no children and no place on the earth that was expecting her, and that a person in that condition has to point the car somewhere or she will simply sit in a parking lot until the gas runs out. She had been sleeping in the car for 9 nights in the lit corner of a truck plaza off the interstate because it had a bathroom that opened at 5 and a shower the manager let her use if she bought coffee. And on the 6th of those nights, reading the only thing that was free on a phone plan she had cut down to almost nothing, she found the list. It was a delinquent tax auction. A county 400 miles to the west, out where the land goes flat and the towns are a grain elevator and a water tower and a straight road between them, was selling off the parcels it had seized for unpaid taxes, 60 some of them, and most were exactly what you would expect. A quarter section of blow dirt nobody could farm, a collapsed barn, a house the fire department had used for practice. But down near the bottom of the list, in the flat cruelty of county shorthand, was Parcel 49. And Parcel 49 was a building, and the description read structure, brick and stone, 2-story, former financial, town of Bristow Flats, condemned, sold AS is where is, no warranty of title or condition, purchaser assumes all risk, and the minimum bid was $6. She read the line 4 times, and each time she waited for the number to grow a 0 while she was not looking at it. There was one photograph attached to the listing, taken from across a wide, empty street on a day the sky was the color of a nickel, and the habit of 9 years took her straight down into it the way it always did. It was a bank. Anyone could see it was a bank, because they had built banks in those towns to be the one permanent thing. The one building that said your money is safe here even when nothing else is, and so it had a stone front 2 stories tall with 2 fat columns and a cornice, and cut into the stone over the door, worn but legible, were the words Renner State Bank, and under that, smaller, established 1891. The windows of the ground floor were boarded with plywood gone silver, and the upper windows were dark, and the whole thing sat on its corner with the particular dignity of a building that has outlived its entire reason for standing and has not been told. Nora sat up in the car seat. She knew what the inside of a bank like that looked like before she had ever set foot in one, because she had spent 9 years cleaning up after the men who had run banks exactly like it, and she knew that a bank built in 1891 in a town that had clearly stopped growing before her grandparents were born would have a vault, a real one. A walk-in steel and concrete room with a round door and a time lock, because that was the whole point of the building. That was the promise the stone front was making. And she knew that a vault is the one room in any building that a man builds specifically so that it cannot be gotten into, and that a room built to keep everyone out is a room that once it is finally opened, tends to have kept its word about what is inside. The auction was in 8 days. She looked up the town on the free part of her phone. Bristow Flats in Harmon County, population 310 and falling. A town that had been something once and was now a wide place in a state road, a grain elevator that a co-op still ran, a post office open 4 hours a day. A school consolidated away to the county seat 40 years back, and a name everywhere on everything that was the same name that was cut into the stone over the bank door. Renner. There was a Renner grain elevator and a Renner Memorial Ball Field and a Renner Foundation that gave the scholarships, and the more she scrolled, the more the name lay over the whole county like a kind of weather you would live your entire life inside of without ever once thinking to ask where it came from. And there was almost nothing about the bank. It had closed in 1961, according to a single line in a digitized county history, when the Renner family consolidated their holdings into the newer bank they had opened out on the highway, and the old building had stood empty ever since. And that was the entire record. 400 miles of internet, and that was all of it. A bank that had been the beating heart of a town for 70 years and then simply stopped, and no one had written down why. That absence was the thing that kept her scrolling at 1 a.m. She had spent 9 years in a basement learning that a gap in the record is never an accident, that when a set of books runs clean for 70 years and then just ends, somebody closed it on purpose. And somebody decided what would and would not be remembered, and the deciding is always the tell. A bank does not just die. Somebody has to kill it, and somebody has to agree to forget how. $6, $4, it did not matter. The number was not the thing. The thing was that she had spent 9 nights learning to the exact dollar what it costs a person to have nowhere on the earth to lie down, and here was a building with a stone roof and a vault, going for the price of a cup of coffee, in a town that had put one family's name on everything it owned and had quietly agreed 60 years ago to stop asking questions about the one building that family had let go dark. She counted her money twice and did the arithmetic of gas against distance 3 times, and on the 8th morning she drove west into the flat country, and the land opened up around the road the way it does out there, until the sky was the biggest thing in the world and the towns came at her 1 grain elevator at a time, each one a little emptier than the last. And she reached the Harmon County seat at 9 in the morning and found the auction in a room in the basement of the courthouse with a drop ceiling and a coffee urn and about 15 people in it, most of them there for a half section of irrigated ground that 2 farming operations wanted badly enough to hate each other over. The parcels went fast, blow dirt, the collapsed barn. The house the fire department had burned, the irrigated half section, which took 20 minutes and got ugly. Then most of the room stood up and reached for their seed company caps, and the auctioneer, a heavy patient man with a voice worn down to a groove, read Parcel 49 to the 7 people who were left. Structure, brick and stone, 2-story, former financial, town of Bristow Flats. Condemned, $6. Nora raised her hand. The auctioneer looked at her over the top of a clipboard, and 2 men by the door who had been zipping their jackets stopped zipping them. And one of them said something to the other, low, and they both looked at her the way men look at a stranger who has just reached for something they had agreed among themselves was not worth reaching for. $6, the auctioneer said. Do I hear 7? And he waited. And nobody said 7, and one of the men by the door made a short sound through his nose, the particular sound a man makes when he has decided something about you and wants you to hear him decide it. And then the 2 of them went out into the hall, and their voices went away down the corridor and around a corner and were gone. Sold, the auctioneer said, at $6, and then he did a thing he had not done for a single other parcel that morning, which was that he set the clipboard down and looked at her for a moment over his reading glasses. You know what that building is, he said. It's the old Renner Bank, Nora said. It's got a vault. The auctioneer looked at her a second longer, and then he picked the clipboard back up and stamped the page. It's a building nobody has bought in 60 years, he said. I'd want you to know that going in. Nora paid in ones. She had the exact 6 singles folded in the pocket of her coat, because after 9 nights in a car, a person knows to the dollar what is in every pocket she owns. And the clerk at the treasurer's window made her sign in 5 places, and one of the places was a paragraph set in bold type in which the purchaser accepted the structure in its present condition and released the county from every claim that condition might ever give rise to. And Nora read every word of it, slowly, because 9 years of reading other people's books had taught her that the sentence nobody reads is always the sentence somebody wrote on purpose. There is a demolition order on that parcel, the clerk said, sliding the deed under the bars of the window. It's old, but it's live. You didn't buy a building exactly. You bought a building with a clock on it. How long is the clock? Nora said. That's between you and the county code officer, the clerk said, and she held the paper down under 2 fingers for a second before she let it go, the way you hold down something that might blow away, and she said, without looking up, Bristow Flats is a long way out, and it's mostly one family out there, and they've been trying to get that corner cleared for a good many years, and a person who's got no stake in a place is smart not to go stirring the bottom of it. Then she took her fingers off the deed and called the next parcel, and Nora walked up the courthouse stairs and out into a parking lot in the thin gold light of an October morning, holding the deed to a building in a town she had never seen. And she stood there and laughed once, out loud, at nothing, which was the first sound of that kind she had made since her mother died. Bristow Flats came at her the way those towns do, which is that it did not announce itself and then it was simply there, a grain elevator standing up white against the sky, miles before anything else, and then the elevator got closer and became huge. A concrete cathedral of the plains with Renner painted down the side of it in letters 10 feet tall. And under the elevator the town spread out low and gray and mostly empty, 2 streets crossing at a stoplight that had been switched to a blinking amber because the town had decided it was not worth the electricity to make it do more. There was a post office the size of a garage. There was a co-op with a couple of pickups nosed up to it. There was a row of storefronts down the main street, and half of them were dark, their windows soaped or boarded, and at the far end, on the best corner in town, where the two streets met, stood the bank. The listing photograph had lied by being small. In person, the Renner State Bank did not sit on its corner so much as hold it, 2 stories of cut limestone gone the soft gray of old bone, with 2 heavy columns and a wide stone lintel, and cut into the stone above the door in letters a foot tall, Renner State Bank, and beneath it established 1891. And beneath that, smaller, so worn she had to stand square in front of it to catch the words, Safe Deposit A.N.D. Trust. The ground floor windows were boarded with plywood gone silver and warped at the corners. And on the plywood over the door, in a plastic sleeve the weather had gotten into anyway, was a notice, and she read it through the fogged plastic. Notice of condemnation. Do not enter. Structure unsafe. And a date and a signature she could not make out, and the small county seal pressed into the corner. There was a side door on the alley face, steel, with a hasp and a padlock the color of dried blood, and she stood back off the curb into the empty street to see the whole of it, the columns and the cornice and the 2 dark upper windows, and she thought, standing there in a town where her own footsteps were the loudest thing on the street, that in 9 years of handling the books of dead banks, she had never once stood inside the room where the money had actually been kept. There was a hardware and feed store 2 doors up the main street with a hand-painted sign and a bell on the door, and she went in for a hasp cutter she could not afford, and a headlamp and a pair of work gloves, and while the young man at the counter rang her up, he was looking past her shoulder out the front window at the corner. You're the $6, he said. It was not unfriendly. He was maybe 27, heavy-set and soft-spoken, in a canvas coat with a co-op cap pushed back, and there was a kindness in his face that had not yet been taught to be careful. Word went around the co-op about 8 this morning, he said. My aunt runs the treasurer's window over at the county. She said a lady from out of state bought the old Renner Bank for $6 and knew it had a vault before anybody told her. I could tell from the listing, Nora said. Building like that always has a vault. That's the whole point of it. The young man's eyes came off the corner and onto her, and something in his face sharpened. The way a person's face changes when a stranger says a word in a language he did not expect a stranger to speak. His name, when she caught the tag, was Cody. Nobody's been inside that building since before my dad was born, Cody said. It comes up every few years. Somebody buys it. And then, Nora said, and then they don't, Cody said, and he said it flat, the way the clerk had said her sentence, like the end of something somebody had taught him and he had never once thought to question, and then he seemed to hear himself, and he rang the drawer shut and pushed the sack across the counter, and in a lower voice, not looking at her, he said, if anybody asks you what you're doing, you're fixing it up to sell. That's all. You're not looking into anything. You just want to flip it and go. Why would anybody ask? Nora said. They won't, Cody said too fast, and the drawer banged shut. The padlock on the alley door had been on that hasp so long it had become a kind of stone, and the cutter did not so much sever it as crush it, and when Nora hauled the steel door, it came open a foot and jammed against a dune of 60 years of grit and dead flies, and the fine pale dust of the plains packed against the inside of it. She put her shoulder to it, and it gave, and the building let its breath out against her face, and it was not the smell she had braced for, not rot, but cold stone and old paper, and under it, faint and mineral and unmistakable to anyone who has spent years in the vaults of dead banks, the flat, dry smell of currency and iron and the particular varnish they used to seal the counters. A smell she would have known blind. She stood in the doorway and breathed it, and something turned over in her chest that she did not have a name for, and then she switched on the headlamp and went in. The ground floor was one high room, taller than it had any right to be, built to make a farmer take his hat off. A long marble counter ran across the middle of it with the teller windows still in their brass cages, 4 of them, the little arched brass grills a farmer had slid his crop money under for 70 years, and behind the counter the plaster still held the paler rectangles where things had hung, a calendar, a portrait, the framed first dollar. There was a great round clock on the back wall with its hands stopped. There was a roll-top desk in the manager's corner, empty, its pigeonholes gaping, and set into the back wall, dead center, so that it was the first thing a person saw coming in the front door and the last thing he saw going out was the vault. It was a beautiful and a terrible thing. A round steel door as tall as a man and thicker than a fist, mounted in a frame of polished steel with a great brass combination dial and a time-lock window and a spoked handle like the wheel of a ship, and on the face of it, in gold leaf gone dim, was painted the name of the safe company and, in a curved banner, Renner State Bank, Safe Deposit A&D Trust. The door stood open. It stood open the way a mouth stands open, and inside it the main vault was empty, swept, stripped, the steel shelving bare, a room the size of a small bedroom, lined in polished steel and holding nothing at all. Because a vault door that grand is the first thing the family would have emptied when they closed the place, and they had, 60 years ago. And anyone who had ever wondered about the Renner Bank had wondered about that round door and had been shown, by whoever let them in to look, this same empty swept room, and had gone away satisfied that there was nothing in the old bank but dust. Nora stood in the open vault with her headlamp lighting the bare shelves and felt the small, cold disappointment of it. And then the habit of 9 years turned her around, because a bank that size, a safe deposit and trust that had served a whole county, did not keep its records and its safe deposit boxes in the same room where it kept the day's cash. There would be a second vault. There is always a second vault, a book vault, a records vault, usually below, built cheaper and plainer than the show vault upstairs. Because no farmer ever needed to be impressed by the room where the paper lived. She found the stairs behind an unmarked door in the manager's corner, iron stairs going down into a dark the headlamp could barely dent, and she went down them on the edges with her hand flat on the cold stone wall, the way a lifetime of old buildings had taught her, and at the bottom was a low brick basement. The boiler gone to rust, the coal room, a room of empty shelving that had been the record storage, and at the far end, in the wall that backed against the alley, a doorway. It had been a vault door once. She could see the steel frame of it still set in the brick, the pinholes where the hinges had been, the channel where the door had seated. But the door itself was gone, taken off and carried away, and the doorway it had left, the whole opening, edge to edge, floor to lintel, had been filled with concrete block. 10 courses of it, gray, laid by a pair of hands that were not a mason's hands and had not cared to become one, the mortar squeezed out between the blocks and never struck. Run down the face of the block in dried gray tongues and left there, because whoever laid it up knew with total certainty that no one was ever going to stand in this basement and look at this wall again. Nora stood in front of it with the headlamp off because there was enough gray day coming down the stairwell to see it by. And she understood the thing about it in her body before she understood it in her head, the way she understood a doctored number before she could have told you which one it was. You do not brick up a vault to store things in it. You store things behind a vault door, because a vault door is a thing that opens and locks and opens again. That is the entire genius of a vault. And somebody had taken a good steel vault door off its hinges, carried it out of the building, and then walled the opening shut with cheap block, so that anyone who ever came down into this basement in the next 60 years would think, if he thought anything at all, that the little room had been filled in and forgotten the way you fill in a well. She did not touch it that first day. She had learned, in 9 years of other people's buried mistakes, that the first thing your hands want to do is never the first thing to do. She stood in front of the bricked vault until the light in the stairwell began to fail, and then she went back up the iron stairs and out the alley door and sat in her car at the curb with the bank standing over her like a held breath, and she slept sitting up, and she woke before 6 because a county pickup with an amber bar on the roof had nosed in behind her, and a man was standing in her mirror writing something on a clipboard. He was in his late 50s, thick through the shoulders, in a canvas coat over a county shirt, with a gray mustache and the patient, unbothered face of a man who has been cussed at in a great many places and long ago stopped taking it to heart. His name, stitched over the pocket, was Petrick. "You'd be the buyer," he said, not a question, when she rolled the window down. "Roy Petrick, County Code Office. Come on out. This goes faster if you can see what I'm pointing at." They stood in the cold on the alley side, and Roy Petrick pointed at things for 20 minutes. The parapet where the limestone had let a seam of water in and the capstones had shifted. The back corner where a downspout had been dumping into the same square yard of foundation for 40 years, which is how you take a stone building apart with nothing but water and time and no hurry at all. The sag in the roof line you could only see once he held a level up against the sky. "The order's 3 years old," he said. "It's nothing personal to you. That parapet lets go in an ice storm and it comes down on a sidewalk. That's all it is. It's arithmetic." "How long do I have?" Nora said. "Right now, by the letter, you've got none. It's condemned. You're not to occupy it, and before you tell me you didn't sleep in your car out here last night, I saw the seat back. So don't." He flipped a page and looked at her over the clipboard, and something in him unbent about half an inch. "Here's your way out if you want it. You can petition the board to lift the order, bring me a report from a licensed structural engineer that says she can be made safe, and a scope of work and a schedule, and I'll carry it to the board myself. They sit the second Tuesday of the month." "What does a structural engineer cost?" Nora said. "More than $6, Roy Petrick said, without any meanness in it, which was somehow worse than if there had been any. He looked up at the stone front, at the cut name and the date, and then he looked at the boarded windows, and then for just a second, he looked at nothing at all. "I'll give you 90 days before it goes on the demolition schedule," he said. That's me being soft-hearted and my supervisor being down at his daughter's in Texas till after the new year. 90 days. And you don't sleep in there, because if I catch you sleeping in there, I have to write it, and if I write it, your 90 days is gone. He was almost back in his truck when she asked it, because she had thought about nothing else since the basement. "Mr. Petrick, why would somebody brick up the lower vault?" He stopped with his hand on the door handle. It was a small stop. If you had not been watching for it, you would have called it nothing at all. "You've been in the cellar," he said. "I went down on the edges." "There's a records vault down there," he said. Not to her, more to the truck door, and then he got in and started it, and she thought that was the end of it, but he put the window down about 4 inches and looked at her through the gap. 90 days, he said. "And Miss Ellery, if I was you, I'd fix that parapet and paint the front, and I would not spend a lot of my time down in that cellar. There's people in this county with long memories and short patience about that particular building, and you're new. And new is the worst thing a person can be when she goes turning over a rock that somebody set down on purpose a long time ago." Then he backed out of the alley and drove up the main street, and he did not look at the bank in his mirror. And Nora stood in the cold and watched him not look at it. Kurt Renner came on the third day. He came in the late afternoon in a clean white pickup with a foundation logo on the door, and he was maybe 52, trim, gray at the temples, in a quarter zip and good boots, And he got out and put his hand out from 10 feet away so that she had all the time in the world to see it coming, which is a manner certain men are raised into. You bought my family's headache, he said, and he smiled, and the smile was warm and easy and long practiced, and Nora understood at once that this was the most powerful man she had met in that county, and that he had driven to her instead of sending for her, and that he wanted her to feel the courtesy of that. Kurt Renner. My grandfather closed that building before I was born, and my family has been trying to get it off the county's books ever since. He walked her around it. He knew it better than she did. He put his palm flat on the limestone and told her his great-grandfather had built half of the main street when the wheat was king, that this corner had been the heart of the whole county once, that the family had opened the new bank out on the highway in the 60s and simply never found a use for the old one, and that his grandfather had always said the stone pile ought to have come down 40 years ago. He was charming, and he was fluent, and he never once looked at the boarded windows of the ground floor. And Nora, who had spent 9 years learning to notice exactly what a person keeps out of the frame, noticed that. I'll be straight with you, because you'll hear the talk anyway, he said. The foundation wants that corner. We've wanted it for years. We could never do a thing with it because the title went sideways back in the 60s, and no lawyer we ever hired could untangle it. And now a lady from out of state buys it for $6 at a tax sale, and I'll be honest, I laughed when my cousin called me, because it is the first time in 60 years anybody has actually been able to own that ground clean. Then he made his offer. $19,000 cash for the parcel as is this week. He said the number, and then he stood there and let it sit in the cold air between them, because he knew, the way men with money always know, precisely what $19,000 sounds like to a woman who has $1,100, and it went through Nora like heat, because $19,000 was a deposit and a year of rent. It was a door that locked and a bed that was hers and a life that started again, and the arithmetic of it ran through her so fast and so hot that she had to look away from him, and the only thing on that corner tall enough to look at was the cut stone name over the door. Can I ask you something, she said. Why is the lower vault bricked up? And Kurt Renner was still. For the first time in 20 minutes, he was completely still. What lower vault? He said. In the cellar. Somebody took the vault door off and walled the opening shut with block by hand a long time ago. I wondered if you knew why. And she watched him decide in about a second and a half to keep smiling. Old buildings, he said. People used to wall off a damp cellar room instead of paying to fix it. Cheaper to lose the space than to chase the water. That whole basement's a death trap, which is exactly why I'd hate to see you spend one more night out here on the street over it. He put his hands in his pockets. 19,000. You could be back home by the weekend and never think about Bristow Flats again. And I'd call that a good week for the both of us. Can I have a few days? Nora said. You can have until the second Tuesday, he said, still pleasant, still kind. That's when the county board sits, and if the demolition moves ahead, the foundation will bid the tear down, and then we'll own the corner anyway, and you'll own a deed to a pile of rubble. He said it without a trace of malice, the way you tell somebody the weather is turning. Then he shook her hand again and got into the white pickup, and he was 3 feet from pulling away when he stopped and put the window down. Don't go down in that cellar, he said warmly. That floor's rotted, and there's bad air down there. Old buildings like that. I'd hate to read your name in the county paper. And that more than the bricked wall. More than the clerk holding the deed down with 2 fingers, more than the code officer telling her which rock to leave lying, is the thing that kept Nora Ellery in Bristow Flats, because she had spent 9 years learning one thing better than she had ever learned anything else in her life, which is how to see the single detail a person has arranged the entire rest of the picture to keep her from seeing. And a man who is driven out to buy a building he calls a worthless stone pile does not, in the same breath, twice. Tell you to stay out of one particular room in the cellar of it. She did not take the $19,000, and she did not tell him no, which are two entirely different things, and she used the space between them to buy herself 11 days. She got a job at the co-op, weighing grain trucks and running the little diner counter they kept for the drivers. 5 in the morning until the early afternoon, because a woman who can stand at a records table for 10 hours can certainly weigh trucks and pour coffee for 8, and it paid cash at the end of the day, and there was a shower in the back the manager let her use if she kept it clean. Then she worked the building from 2 o'clock until the light in the cellar failed. She did not sleep in it. She held to that. And she began to ask carefully the way you turn over a stone with your fingers and not your whole hand about the Renner Bank and why it had closed, and she learned very quickly that there are 2 kinds of silence in a small town, and that the first kind is the silence of people who do not know, and the second kind is the silence of people who know exactly and have agreed, together, a long time ago, not to. The first person who really talked to her was an old woman, and Nora found her the way you find everything in a town like that, which is that the old woman found her. Her name was Verna Kessler, and she was 89 years old, and she lived alone in a low white house at the edge of town with a kitchen window that had looked out at the water tower in the back of the bank her whole life, and she had a grandson drive her down to the co-op diner on a Thursday morning, and she sat at the counter and drank half a cup of coffee and watched Nora work. And when the breakfast drivers had cleared out, she said, without any hello, "You're the one bought the old bank." "I am," Nora said. "Did you know it when it was open?" Verna Kessler set her cup down and looked at Nora with a pair of pale blue eyes that had not gone soft with age the way most do, and she said, "I was born in 1937. It closed when I was a girl of 24. I knew it every day of its life that I was alive for." She turned the cup a quarter turn on its saucer. "My sister worked in it," she said. "That was the whole trouble." Nora put the coffee pot down. After her shift, she drove Verna Kessler home and helped her up her own porch steps, and the old woman had her sit at the kitchen table with the window that looked at the back of the bank. And she talked for 3 hours while the afternoon went long and gold across the wheat stubble, and this is what she said. "My sister was Iola," she said. "Iola Marsh. She was 11 years older than me, which is to say she was a grown woman keeping books in that bank before I was old enough to know what a book was, and she was the smartest person this county ever grew, man or woman. And it did not do her one bit of good, it did the opposite, because a smart woman in 1936 was a thing that frightened people, and the person she frightened most was August Renner. August Renner owned the bank the way his family owned everything, the elevator and the land loans and the seed money, and through those, the men. Because in a weak county in the Depression, the man who holds the paper on your ground holds you. And it was the Depression, Verna said, and it was the dust on top of it, and the government sent money out here. Relief money, drought money, federal loans meant to keep a family on its land through a couple of bad years so the whole county did not blow away and go to California. That money came through the bank because there was nowhere else for it to come through, and August Renner sat between the government and every farmer in Harmon County, and my sister kept the books that said who got it and how much and whether it was paid back. Verna folded her hands on the table. Iola found it in 1936, she said. She found that the drought loans on better than 40 farms had been written down as unpaid and gone to foreclosure when the farmers had paid. When Iola's own hand in the daybook showed they had paid, and the farms had been taken and folded into the Renner holdings for the price of the back taxes, and the relief money the government sent to save those families had been drawn out of the bank in cash against their names and never given to them at all. 40-some families put off their land in 3 years, and every acre of it ended up Renner ground, and it was all in the books twice, once the true way in the day book my sister kept, and once the false way in the ledger August Renner posted to the state. She confronted him. Verna's voice did not shake. It went flat and quiet and hard, the way a voice goes when it is saying a thing it has said to itself 10,000 times. She was 29 years old, and she walked into August Renner's office with the daybook under her arm, and she told him what she had found, and she told him she was going to write to the state. And August Renner looked at her, and he did not argue with her, because he did not have to. Within the week, the bank's federal relief account was found to be short. $11,000 short. And the person who kept that account, the person who signed the cash-out slips that August Renner had stood over her and made her sign, the person whose hand was on every entry, was Iola Marsh. A single woman of 29 who lived with her mother and her little sister and had no money and no husband and no man in the county to stand up and say her name. And August Renner sat in the front pew of the church every Sunday and had given the town its water tower. Who do you think they believed? Verna said. Iola was arrested in the spring of 1937, 3 weeks before I was born. They said she had stolen the relief money a little at a time over 3 years, that a spinster with a sick mother had bled the farmer's salvation into her own pocket, and there was the account short by $11,000, and there were the slips with her name on them, and there was August Renner, grieved and forgiving, telling the county he did not wish to press it too hard, that the poor girl had been under a strain. The daybook was gone. She had kept it in the records vault, the lower one, the one you cannot get into, and when the sheriff went to get it, it was not there, and August Renner said there had never been any such book, that Iola had invented a second set of books to cover herself and destroyed them when she was caught, and who was going to say otherwise? A man does not need proof to be believed. He needs only to be enough of a man, agreed with by enough people, for long enough. They did not send her to prison, Verna said, and for a long time I thought that was a mercy, and it was not. It was the opposite. They let August Renner drop it. He was magnanimous about it in front of the whole county, and my sister was let go from the bank and never charged, and so she was never tried. And so she was never cleared, because you cannot be cleared of a thing you were never allowed to answer, and she lived the rest of her life in this county as the Marsh girl who stole from starving farmers and got away with it because she was pitiful. No man would have her. No family would hire her. My mother lost the house. We moved into 2 rooms behind the laundry, and Iola took in mending and washing, the smartest person this county ever grew, and she raised me on it, and she never once in my hearing said the word Renner. And she died in 1951 of a pneumonia. She was too worn down to fight, and she was 44 years old. And there were 6 people at the grave, and 4 of them were us. Verna Kessler looked out the kitchen window at the back of the bank, gray against the gold stubble. And every one of those 40-some families, she said, that got put off their ground, they knew. Not the way I knew, but they knew. The way you know a thing you cannot afford to know, and they took the story about my sister because the story about my sister was the only story that let them keep going to that bank and to that church and living in that county without going mad. If Iola stole it, then their farms were honestly lost, and August Renner was a hard man in a hard time. And if Iola did not steal it, she stopped. If Iola did not steal it, Nora said, then every soul in Harmon County spent 60 years living on ground that was taken from their neighbors, Verna said, and paid for it by agreeing altogether to believe the worst thing they could about a dead woman who never did a wrong thing in her life. That is a great deal easier than you would think. That is the easiest thing in the world. The next morning, Nora Ellery went down the iron stairs with a $5 drilling hammer and a masonry chisel and a dust mask that Cody from the hardware store had put in her sack without charging her and without saying why, and she stood in front of the bricked vault in the gray light coming down the stairwell, and she did not swing right away. She photographed it first, on the phone, the whole wall and the mortar tongues, and the empty steel frame that still held the shape of the door that had been carried away, because 9 years in a records basement had taught her that the first thing you document is the thing before you touch it. Then she set the chisel into the dead soft mortar of the top course, and she swung. Concrete block laid dry, handed by a man who was not a mason, comes apart, one block at a time, if you are patient. And Nora was the most patient person that building had seen in 60 years. The mortar was bad, and had been bad the day it was mixed, and the blocks came loose almost politely, and by the middle of the day there was a dark gap along the top of the doorway, and cold air came out of it across her face, air that had been shut in a lightless room since before Verna Kessler was born, and it smelled of paper and iron and dust and something like old pennies. And she stood there with her heart going and did not put her head through. She took the whole top row out, and then the next, and when the light in the stairwell had begun to fail, there was a hole the size of a car window in the middle of the wall, and she got the headlamp and she sat down on the cold brick floor for a minute because her legs had their own opinion about the moment. And then she stood and put her head and the light through the hole. The records vault was there, all of it. A long, narrow room built into the foundation against the alley wall, and 60 years of total dark had kept it the way dark keeps things, which is completely. There were steel shelves down both long walls, and on the shelves the ledgers of the Renner State Bank stood in ranks in their board covers, 70 years of them, spine after spine hand lettered with the years. There was a bank of safe deposit boxes built into the end wall, 100 little brass doors, most still locked, a few standing open and empty. There was a table in the middle with a green shaded lamp on it, the bulb long dead. And on the table, squared up in the center of it as deliberately as a place setting, weighted down against nothing by a smooth river stone that somebody had carried down there on purpose, there was a day book, a wide flat ledger bound in black cloth, and an envelope, and a small gray steel strongbox with a handle on top, the kind a man carries cash in. And Nora Ellery stood with her head through a hole in a wall and her light on that table, and understood, the way you understand a wrong note, that these three things had been left out on purpose, set in the middle of the table by the last person out of the room, so that whoever finally broke in would find them first and would not have to search. She widened the hole until a person could step through it, and she swept one careful path across the floor to the table, documenting as she went, and then she did not open anything. She wanted a witness, and she wanted the witness to be old, and she wanted, though she could not have said exactly why. The one person left alive who had loved Iola Marsh to be standing in that room when the box came open. She drove to the low white house at the edge of town in the dark, and Verna Kessler was still up, because the old do not sleep much, and the ones with something unfinished sleep least of all, and Nora stood on the porch and said, "I opened the wall, and there's a book on the table, and an envelope, and a strongbox, and your sister's name is on the book, and I haven't touched them, because I think they were left for you." Verna Kessler looked at her for a long moment in the porch light, and then she went and got her coat. She brought her grandson to drive, and Nora brought Cody, because she wanted a second witness who was young and would be alive to remember it in 50 years, and the four of them went down the iron stairs at 10 o'clock at night and stepped one at a time through the hole in the wall into the records vault. Verna Kessler stood in the middle of that room with her hands folded and looked at the 70 years of ledgers and the 100 brass doors and the dead lamp, and her face did a thing that Nora did not look at, because there are moments when the decent thing is to study your own boots. The envelope was addressed on the front in a hard flat pencil, and it said to whoever finally opens this room. Nora looked at Verna, and Verna nodded, and Nora opened it and read it out loud under the headlamp because it did not seem like a thing to read to yourself. "My name is Iola Marsh," it began, and Verna Kessler made a sound that was not a word and put her hand on the table to hold herself up and said, "Go on, go on," and Nora went on. "My name is Iola Marsh, and I kept the books of the Renner State Bank from 1928 until the day they turned me out, and if you are reading this, then the wall is down that I begged them not to build. And it is too late to help me, and I hope to God it is not too late to help the others. In the years of the drought, the government of the United States sent relief and loans into this county to keep its families on their land. And that money passed through this bank and through my hands, and I entered it true, every dollar, in the daybook that lies beside this letter, whose entries you may set against the ledger Mr. August Renner posted to the state, which lies on the third shelf under the year 1936, and where the two books disagree, mine is the true one, and I will tell you how you may know. In my book, the loans on the farms herein listed are marked paid, in the farmer's own hands where they signed, and in Mr. Renner's book, those same loans are marked defaulted, and the farms foreclosed and taken into his holdings. And the relief money drawn out in cash against the family's names and never carried to them, and the cash out slips he stood over me and made me sign, because he was careful, he was always careful, to see that it was my hand and never his on the paper. I have listed here the 41 families and the legal description of every quarter section taken from them. And I have placed in this room the original warranty deeds, which were surrendered to the bank as security and which by law were never lawfully recorded to the Renner name, because a foreclosure founded on a false default conveys nothing, and so the ground that this family has held for a generation it has never once truly owned, and the people it was taken from, or their children, own it yet. If there is a court left in this country with a spine to say so. Nora's voice was steady because she had trained it across 9 years to be steady over exactly this kind of page, but she had to stop once. And Verna Kessler said, into the stopping, that is her hand. I would know it in the dark. And Nora went on to the last of it. I am not a thief. I have never in my life taken a dollar that was not mine. They have taken my name instead, which they could do without any money at all, needing only to be believed, and being believed is a thing that August Renner was born with, and I was not. I cannot prove myself in my own lifetime, for a woman who carries this book into that courthouse will be buried under it, and the book buried with her. And so I am doing the only thing left that an honest bookkeeper can do, which is to make the account true and leave it where the truth cannot be burned, and trust that this county will one day be better than it is tonight. To whoever you are, I ask only this. Do not let them tell you it is too old to matter. A debt does not expire because the one who was robbed has died. Set it right. Iola Marsh. The 4th of November, 1949. Nobody in that vault said anything for a while. Up in the town, a dog barked once and quit, and the wind worked at something loose on the roof, and the ordinary night of the plains went on the way it had gone on, outside the driveway of a house Nora no longer owned. 400 miles and a lifetime to the east. Then Verna Kessler put her hand flat on the black cloth cover of the daybook, the way Nora had watched 2 old people in that county lay a hand flat on that building as if it were an animal, and she said very quietly to no one, 14 years she left it here. 14 years she came down and dusted it and waited. Then she said, open the box. The strong box was not locked, or its lock had given up long ago, and Nora lifted the lid with the gloves on, and inside, banded in paper wrappers gone brown and soft, was money. Currency, old large-sized bills, and under them, a folder of United States drought relief warrants and bonds made out to the Harmon County families by name, never endorsed, never cashed, never delivered. The actual relief the government had sent to save 41 farms drawn out of the bank against those families, and then not stolen exactly, but hidden, held, because a man like August Renner could not spend a government warrant made out to a farmer without leaving his own name on it at last, and so he had had it walled up instead, the evidence and the money both. One problem sealed behind 10 courses of block, and Nora understood then why the wall was there and why it had never come down. Because the wall was not hiding an empty room, the wall was hiding the one thing in the county that could hang the Renner name, and every soul who might have opened it had been given 60 years of good reasons not to. Here is what a laid-off forensic bookkeeper does with 70 years of ledgers and a dead woman's day book and a strong box of buried relief money. She did not rush. She did the thing she had been trained across 9 years to do and had been thrown away for knowing how to do, which was to be far more careful than the situation felt like it could bear. She did not carry a single original out of the county that first night. She left everything on the table where Iola had set it, and she photographed every page, the daybook entry by entry and August Renner's state ledger entry by entry beside it, with a ruler and a scale card in the corner of each frame, the way the assessor's office had trained her. Because she knew the first thing they would try to say was that she had forged it, and she was going to make that the hardest thing in the world to say. It took her 9 days. She worked the co-op scale from 5 to 1, and she copied pages from 2 o'clock until the light failed, and she made 4 full sets, the 2 books set side by side, the letter, the list of the 41 families and the legal description of every quarter section, and photographs of the unrecorded deeds and the never cashed warrants in the box. 1 set she gave to Verna Kessler, 1 set she mailed to the state banking regulator and the State Historical Society with a letter explaining what it was and where it had lain for 60 years. 1 she mailed to herself, sealed, and did not open, for the postmark. 1 she kept. And she took the daybook and August Renner's ledger, the 2 of them together, to the county recorder of deeds at the courthouse, a careful woman near retirement, and she laid them open on the counter side by side to the same farm on the same date, paid in one hand and defaulted in the other. And she watched the recorder read across the 2 pages 4 times, the way Nora herself had read the number the first night, and then the recorder took her glasses off and did not put them back on for a while. There is a name in this county, the recorder said finally, that I have spent my whole working life recording onto deeds, and I have never once, not one time. Wondered how the first of it got there. She looked up. There's a man still living who can answer for this. You know that. The oldest Renner. The oldest Renner was Merrill. He was 91 years old, and he was August Renner's only son, and he had been a young clerk in that bank under his father in the 30s and had run it himself in the 50s, and he was the man who had closed it in 1961 and consolidated the family holdings into the new bank on the highway, and it was Merrill Renner, 26 years old and newly in charge, who had gone down into that cellar the week the old bank closed and laid up 10 courses of block with his own soft clerk's hands to wall his father's crime and his family's fortune behind a vault door he carried out to the dump himself. He had lived 60 years since on the ground that fraud had bought. He had given the county its ball field and its scholarships. He sat on the historical board. There was a bronze plaque in the lobby of the Consolidated High School that called him the finest citizen Harmon County had ever produced, and he was, by the near unanimous agreement of a whole county, exactly that, and he was still alive to hear it said otherwise. The town found out inside of a day, the way a town does. Kurt Renner came back to the bank on a Monday evening, and this time he did not put his hand out from 10 feet away. He stood in the empty street with his hands in his pockets, and he raised his offer to $55,000, and he was not warm, and he was not cold, He was frightened, and Nora heard it plainly, because fear is a thing you can hear in a voice the way you can see it in a face once you have learned to look. "Whatever's down there," he said. "It's 90 years old, and it's half a story, and it will hurt a great many people who never did one thing to anybody. My family put the hospital wing on that town, and the water on it, and half the jobs in this county, and you are going to come in from 400 miles away and set a match to all of it over a grudge that isn't even yours." "It isn't a grudge," Nora said. "It's a bookkeeping entry. I didn't make it. Your great-grandfather made it the night he made an honest woman sign for money he was stealing, and he never once thought about what a second set of books does, which is wait." She looked at him. "You didn't know," she said. "Did you?" And Kurt Renner did not answer that, which was its own answer, and he stood in the street a while longer, and then he got in his truck and sat in it without starting it, and then he drove away slow. The county board sat on the second Tuesday, but the thing that mattered did not happen at the board. It happened 2 days before it, in the lobby of the dead bank, because Verna Kessler asked for it there, and no one had the heart to tell an 89-year-old woman no. Nora and Cody swept 60 years of dust off the marble counter and set the 2 books open on it under a pair of work lamps run off a generator, Iola's True Day Book, and August Renner's False Ledger, open to the same page and the same day. And they set beside them the list of the 41 families, and then they opened the doors, and the town came in. They came because a thing like that cannot be kept, and they came from the co-op and the church and the farms that had been in other families' names before 1937, and the high old room filled up under the stopped clock, 60, 80, more than 100 of them, standing between the teller cages where their grandparents had slid the crop money under the brass. Verna Kessler sat in a chair in the front in her good coat. Roy Petrick came in his county shirt and stood at the back with his cap in his hands, and a little after the room was full, the white foundation pickup pulled up outside, and Kurt Renner came in, and behind him, pushed in a wheelchair by an aide, with an oxygen line under his nose and a good wool coat over his shoulders and his white hair combed, came Merrill Renner, 91 years old, who had asked to be brought because it had never once in his long life occurred to him that a room in that county could turn against a Renner. Nora Ellery did not make a speech. She had decided that in the car, the way she had decided everything that mattered, alone, at night. She stood behind the counter where 70 years of tellers had stood, and she put one hand flat on each of the 2 open books, and she said, "My name is Nora Ellery, and I bought this bank for $6, and in a vault that was bricked shut in 1961, I found the books it was bricked shut to hide." She did not raise her voice. This is the day book Iola Marsh kept in her own hand, and this is the ledger August Renner posted to the state in his, and they are open to the same farm on the same day in 1936, and one of them says that farm was paid, and the other says it was lost, and I am not going to argue with you about which is true, because Iola Marsh already proved it 90 years ago. By keeping the one book a careful man forgot to burn. Then she read, without hurry, the names, 41 families in the quarter section that had been taken from each, and she read them the way Verna had said the 7 names of the dead in another story in another county, flat and clear and without gathering herself, and as she read them, a sound went through the room. Because the people standing in it were hearing their own family names read off a list of the robbed, and knowing, each of them, that they had been told all their lives it was the Marsh girl who did it, and doing, one by one, silently in the space of a few minutes, the arithmetic that a whole county had refused to do for 60 years. There is a sound a room makes when a great many people arrive at the same terrible name at the same moment, and not one of them says it aloud, and the lobby of the Renner State Bank made that sound, and then it was so quiet you could hear the wind work at the boarded windows. In the front, in the wheelchair, Merrill Renner put both hands on the arms of the chair and tried to rise. He got himself half up, staring at the two open books on the counter, at his father's hand and Iola Marsh's hand lying side by side under the lamps, and for a moment the whole room thought the old man was going to speak, was going to explain, was going to do the thing the powerful do, which is to make the terrible thing reasonable. And then he sat back down, very slowly, and he did not say one word, then or ever, because there was nothing to say that the two books had not already said better, and the silence of Merrill Renner in that chair was the loudest thing in the county. It was Kurt who stood up. He was not asked to. He stood in the crowd with his face gone gray, and he turned not to Nora, but to the room, to the town. And he said in a voice that was not steady, "I did not know. I have spent my whole life handing this county my family's money, and I never once asked where the first of it came from or what it bought or who paid for it. And every person in this room over the age of 70 has known since before I was born. And let me go on not knowing, and I would rather you had told me when I was a boy." He looked at Verna Kessler in her chair. "I am withdrawing the demolition tonight," he said, "and I will pay for whatever this building needs, and that is the smallest part of it." He turned to the recorder of deeds, who was standing along the wall. "Every quarter section on that list," he said, "the foundation will convey back, clean, to the families it was taken from or their heirs. And where the ground can't be found or given back the foundation, will pay it out at what it is worth today, and not because it is generous, because it is owed. And it has been owed for 90 years, and my family has been drawing the interest the whole time." Then he sat down, and he put his hand over his eyes, and no one in that room found it strange. Roy Petrak said, for the record, that the condemnation had been correct on the day he wrote it, and that he was moving to vacate it on the ground that the structure now held a documented record of state significance. And then he looked over at Nora and said one sentence that was not in any procedure. "I have driven past this building for 22 years, he said, "and I never once wondered what was behind the wall. The state cleared Iola Marsh's name the following autumn because the machinery that ruins a woman's name in a week takes years to run backward. But the daybook and the letter and the two ledgers went into the record, and the state banking regulator issued a finding, and a judge signed an order that used the words falsely accused and exonerated. And the county put a stone up in the little square by the water tower next to the founder's marker that had a Renner name on it, and the new stone had Iola Marsh's name on it, and under her name it read, 'She kept the true book. She was innocent. The county is sorry.'" Merrill Renner's name came off the high school and out of the lobby, and the bronze plaque went into a box, and Merrill Renner died the following spring, 92 years old, warm in his own bed, and nothing that happened in the lobby of that bank moved a single ounce of him, and that is the part nobody tells you about a thing like this. He was not punished. He was only, at the very last, named. Iola Marsh's name went the other way. It went into the county history that it held 4 lines about her bank and none about her, and the 41 families got their ground back or its worth, and some of them wept in the recorder's office signing for it, and some of them could not look at the paper. And Verna Kessler lived to see every one of those deeds recorded true, and she died at 91, with her sister's name cut in stone in the square where she could see it from her kitchen window. Nora Ellery lives in the old Renner Bank. She fixed the parapet with the foundation's money and the roof with her own, and she does the county's forensic bookkeeping now. The old estates and the tangled ledgers nobody else can read, out of an office she made in the manager's corner under the stopped clock, and she keeps the records vault open, the wall gone, the 70 years of ledgers dusted and shelved and readable, and school classes come through, and she shows them the 2 books open to the same day, the paid and the lost. And she tells them that the whole difference between a hero and a thief that year in that county was which one of them the town had already decided to believe. Verna Kessler came to the diner most mornings until the end and drank half a cup of coffee and told Nora who everyone in the old ledgers was because she was the last one who knew, and Nora wrote it all down, every name, in a book. The way a woman once wrote down the truth of a whole county so that it would make sense to whoever finally came. The great round vault door still stands open on the back wall, empty and swept and grand, the thing the whole town was shown for 60 years so that no one would go looking for the plain bricked one in the cellar that actually held the truth. If you stayed with this all the way to the end, thank you truly. This channel is mostly people sitting up late in a quiet house, and it helps more than you know to be reminded the room is not empty. So tell me where you are listening from tonight. And I want to leave you with the thing I have not been able to set down since I first read that letter under the headlamp. Iola Marsh knew, the day she was turned out, exactly what she had in that book. She could have burned it and made her peace and lived a smaller, easier, unblamed life. Instead, she chose to be called a thief for the rest of her days, and to be buried one, and to trust 10 courses of block and a room full of dark to keep the truth longer than she could keep it herself. On the pure faith that someday somebody would come who knew how to read 2 books side by side. She was right. But she had to be 60 years dead to be right, and she never once knew for certain that she would be. So here is the question I would sit with tonight. If you knew the truth, and telling it would cost you everything, and being believed might not come until long after you were gone. If it came at all, would you keep the true book anyway, and trust the dark the way she did? Or would you tell yourself, the way most of us would, that a truth no one will believe is the same as no truth at all? Sit with which one is actually you. Next time on this channel, a woman inherits a shuttered small-town rail depot for $1 and finds the telegraph office still locked exactly as the last agent left it on a night in 1952, with one undelivered message still clipped to the spindle, and the reason that message was never carried the 4 blocks to the house it was addressed to is the reason the whole town stopped. Speaking of that winter, subscribe if you would like to be there when that office comes open. And in Bristow Flats, it is dark now and cold, and the wind is coming down off the wheat the way it has come down since before any of them were born. And on the best corner in town, the old stone bank stands square to the street with its 2 columns and its cut name, and the ground floor is lit for the first time in 60 years, one warm gold square under the stopped clock, where a woman sits late at a table reading a true book by lamplight, minding the numbers.